All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hope all of you guys are having a great week. Just going to do a quick mailbag today before we get to Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals tonight. We'll be going live on YouTube tonight after the final buzzer. Make sure you guys are there. Got like 20, 25 questions we're going to get to today. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. Don't forget about our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. And then keep dropping mailbag questions in those YouTube comments so we can keep hitting them throughout the rest of the postseason. All right, let's talk some basketball. So the first question, what is your most interesting storyline from a likely Mavs-Celtics final? Obviously, the Celtics have officially secured their spot in the NBA Finals. The Mavs need one more win to do so, but as we've broken down ad nauseum in the show, we're going to get into a little bit deeper today. I don't see a pathway for Minnesota to flip the script against Dallas. I think it's a terrible matchup for them, in addition to the fact that Luka is clearly a better player at this phase of his career than Anthony Edwards, and so I don't really see a path there. So I think the overwhelmingly likely scenario is that we're going to get the Mavs versus the Celtics in the NBA Finals. And so from there, I'm gonna kind of go a little bit deeper into a concept I talked a little bit about last night with Colin Cowherd. What I think is most interesting about this series is the complete difference in the two builds of these rosters, right? Boston feels like more of a talent accumulation type of roster, right? Everyone plays positions that complement each other really well, right? Like Derek White's more of like a skill guard, right? He's also an excellent defensive player and a great athlete, but he's a guy that can, really run a lot of action, excellent pull-up three-point shooter. When they go to late game situations, it usually ends up being Tatum, White, two-man game, right? But then Drew Holiday kind of plays that athlete guard who guards the other team's best guard kind of thing, right? And then you've got, your smaller forward, and then you've got your bigger forward in Jayson Tatum, and then you've got that center position with a rim protector in Kristaps Porzingis, right? But at the same time, none of those guys are like role players, right? Every single one of them has at various points in their careers been playing in very large roles. Even like Derek White, who's been a role player on a lot of teams, like I would argue at this point he's become one of the primary decision makers for the Boston Celtics, right? And so that team is, as we mentioned in many of the recent episodes, all five of those guys that I just mentioned on the open market, if they were free agents right now, would command over $30 million a year. So it's like a very talented, conglomeration of players, right? Then we get into Dallas, and it's like you've got a player in Luka that I believe is better than Jayson Tatum. I believe he's at least the second best player in the league, if not the best player in the league, right? So it's more of like a top-heavy build where you have Luka and Kyrie, and they take on basically the vast majority, they take on the entirety of the offensive decision-making part of the offense. That puts everybody else in a play-finishing role, right? So Derek Jones Jr., it's catch-and-shoot threes, driving closeouts. PJ Washington, it's catch-and-shoot threes, driving closeouts, a little bit of work in the dunker spot, maybe the occasional duck-in post-up, right? Derek Lively, vertical spacing. Daniel Gafford, vertical spacing. Every single guy on the team is playing in a play finishing role on the offensive end of the floor. Then you go over to the defense end of the floor, and every single one of those same guys has super focused and important defensive responsibilities, right? PJ Washington and Derek Jones Jr. are guarding your best guard and forward on the other team. Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford are running deep drop coverage and protecting the rim, and Kyrie and Luka are primarily off ball, although Kyrie's done a good amount of work on ball in this playoff run, right? So it's a lot of like guys having less talent being focused into very specific roles behind these two super talented offensive players versus Boston, where it's like kind of everyone has to do everything because everyone is a star, right? And so like I do find that to be super, super fascinating going into that series. That to me is the most interesting storyline. Another kind of way to look at it is like Luka being potentially the best player in the series versus Boston clearly being the more talented team in the series. And so it's going to be an interesting kind of case study and whether or not the best player in the series can elevate his team over more talent. Now, again, but for the record, we've seen many times over the years that not be enough, right? Like, I think LeBron James was clearly the best player in the world from 2012 to 2020. I thought that was clear. And yet there were several examples over that stretch where he did not win the NBA championship. He won 4 of them. What is it, a 9-year span? So he lost 5 of them, right? So like 2014, that Spurs team just had it cooking in so many different ways offensively, and Dwayne Wade's knee was kind of bothering, and the team was kind of just getting a little bit fatigued, a little bit old, right? 2015, Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving get hurt, right? 2017 and 2018, Kevin Durant and Steph Curry, the second and third best players in the world, team up with each other, and that ends up being enough to unseat him, right? 2019, he has the groin injury. So like you guys can see the point. Like there are many times in NBA history where the best player in the series does not win. I think just look back at the Denver series. Now knowing what we know about Anthony Edwards now, and seeing that he doesn't have the matchup resiliency that someone like a Luka Doncic has, now that we've seen that, we can state unequivocally that the best player in the series in the Denver-Minnesota series was Jokic, and yet Denver lost. And so we're going to see if Luka can reverse that trend going into the NBA Finals. Next question. Does Dallas have what it takes to upset Boston in the finals? Absolutely. They're an elite defensive team, right? I think a big part of it is going to be Luka attacking in pick and roll. I started to just barely look at some film. We're going to do a lot of series preview content around this series because we're just going to have a lot of time. Like, guys, if Dallas wins tonight, which I think they probably will, but Minnesota's got a shot. If Dallas wins tonight, we're looking at 8 consecutive days, full days off before the NBA Finals. Like, I was thinking we'll probably go, there's 2 Dallas-Boston games. We may just do full breakdowns of both of those games. We might spend an entire show talking about the offense. We might bring on Chris Mannix. We might bring on those of you guys who are Dallas fans. If you guys have a specific like team, someone who covers the Mavericks really closely that you guys think is great at it, drop it in the comments. I'll see if I can't reach out and get them on the show. We're going to have a lot of fun previewing this series, and we're going to get into all those details. But one of the things that I noticed in my initial kind of look at some film yesterday is Luka is too big for everybody on Boston, pretty much, except for Jayson Tatum. And so I think a big thing is Boston's not going to want to put Jayson Tatum on Luka, especially not early in the series. I think Drew Holiday is going to get that assignment a lot, right? I think Jaylen Brown and Drew Holiday are going to be the guys that see the majority of the time on him. And like, first possession in the game in Boston, like Luka gets Drew Holiday on his hip and just methodically works him down into the lane, waits for Kristaps Porzingis to recover to the roll man, and then he just shoots an easy little floater over Drew Holiday, and he turns around and makes the too small symbol, right? So like, I think that's going to be kind of like where this series hinges is, can Luka really strangle the pace of the game and pick the Celtics defense apart in the half court? Because if he can and keep the game kind of slowed down and intense and high pressure, maybe on the other end of the floor, can your elite defense play Boston into some of their worst tendencies? Now, one of the things that's going to be interesting is Boston is very much a spread you out type of drive and kick offense, which is very, very different than what Minnesota does, right? And like you're not going to have the luxury that you have in this series of having Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively just park in the paint because Rudy Gobert is terrible at making anything other than a dunk. I'm going to actually pull up this stat real quick. I tweeted it out yesterday, but I pulled this up on Synergy yesterday, and I was like literally blown away. So Rudy Gobert is this stat is like legitimately insane. Let's see. Rudy Gobert is shooting 16 for 35 on layups in this playoff run and 3 for 11 on floaters and hooks. So like that's one of the things that allows Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford to just kind of roam off of Gobert and help in the lane is like, unless it's a clean dunk, Gobert's probably not going to make it. And so that buys you that luxury. That's not what it's going to be like with Al Horford and Kristaps Porzingis. They're going to be operating primarily from the three-point line, and it's going to be a lot more about covering in space. Now, this is where we've found out that Maxi Kleba's coming back tonight. That's a big deal for Dallas, right? Like having Kleba back gives you the ability to put lineups out there with Kleba, PJ Washington, and Derek Jones Jr. all on the floor at the same time. And then you can put those guys on Tatum and Brown and Derek White and ask Kyrie to do a somewhat easier job of guarding someone like a Drew Holiday, and ask Luka to maybe be the guy who's hedging and recovering on an Al Horford or something along those lines. Like they're going to have more options by virtue of having Maxi Kleber back, but it's going to be much more of a defend in space type of series, whereas this series is much more of a load up and pack the paint type of series. So it's going to be very, very different, but Dallas certainly has what it takes, and it's all going to come down to Luka just completely dominating the series, and it's going to come down to physical perimeter containment from Dallas's perimeter defenders. And if they can do that and kind of play Boston into their worst tendencies, I think they've got a good chance. Who is the best lob thrower in NBA history, and why is it Luka Doncic? I was thinking about this earlier. I think it's probably Luka as well. There are a lot of really good lob throwers that I've seen over the years, guys like Trae Young, guys like Chris Paul. LeBron was always good at it. He just never played with a vertical spacing threat until Anthony Davis, and he's been pretty good at connecting him with lobs. But the problem with LeBron and AD is they play very similar positions, so teams will typically switch those ball screens. And so LeBron AD pick and roll is not something you see a ton of unless you're playing against a drop coverage big, right? But I think it's clearly Luka. One of the big things that I think makes him the best at it is he's tall. And like, you got to think, so what makes a lob open? A lob is open when the rim protector leaves the lob threat, right? If the rim protector is leaving the lob threat, that means that a 7-footer or some sort of large center type player is leaving that guy to pressure Luka. And so he's got to be able to get that pass over the tall player. I put in the film session yesterday. Do you guys remember that transition post-up of Mike Conley where Luka spun baseline and threw the lob up to, I think it was Gafford? It might have been Lively. It doesn't matter. But on that play, Gobert left him and double-teamed Luka and came up arms up. And Luka just happened to get the pass up over the top of him, which is just a kind of like a benefit of him being as tall as he is. I've been saying this for a while, but I think Luka is the only current NBA player that can contend for GOAT status. Thoughts? So I thought about this for a little while this morning, because I kind of think of like 3 tiers of young players. There's like the guys in that like age 27 to 30 range that are like kind of in the heart of their prime right now. There's like the guys that are in that like 25 to 26, 24, 25, 26 range. Those to me are the guys that are just entering into their prime. And then there's the guys that are in their early 20s that are like very clearly just like raw talent that are still kind of getting into that phase. In the older tier, Giannis and Jokic, they both have a title, right? But they both turn 30 next year. And so one championship entering into your 30s, they just would have to go on an absolutely crazy run over the next 5 years to enter into those conversations. So that feels pretty unlikely. Joel Embiid, he doesn't have one yet, and he's going to be 30. I think he might actually already be 30, but like Embiid is probably off of that pathway, right? In Luka's tier, which is the kind of guys in that 24, 25, 26 age bracket, I put Luka, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jayson Tatum, and Devin Booker. Devin Booker I just don't think he has that upside. Jayson Tatum, I think, is a really good and maybe even a bit underrated basketball player, but I don't think that he's in the tier of players that can really like dominate the league for a half of a decade. Like I think he's the perfect fit for this super talented Boston roster. But I think if you swapped him with a guy like Luka and put him in a role where he really had to run an offense by himself or with only one secondary shot creator for an 82 game season, I just don't think he's the kind of guy that can really do that at a super high level. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is damn good, but I don't think he's as good as Luka. So I think Luka's really the only guy in his tier that can do it. But in the next generation, I think there's 2 guys that can do it. I think Victor Wembanyama has that potential, and I think Anthony Edwards has that potential. But it's just completely raw potential with those 2. So it's like there's a huge wide range of outcomes for them. And as you get older, those ranges of outcomes kind of zero in between where your current development is and what your potential upside is, right? And so, yeah, I think that Luka certainly has that potential, but I also think that there are some guys in the younger generation that have that potential. What is it that separates Gobert in the eyes of voters from players like AD, Bam, and Victor Wembanyama? I find it odd that media voters complain about him winning just to vote for him year after year. So voters, one of the big things that I learned after I got into this business, a good percentage of voters rely heavily on metrics, which is crazy to me, but it is what it is. And I've had one of those guys explain to me the reasoning, and their whole thing is like the eye test is flawed, but numbers are unbiased, and that's a good way to look at it. I think that that's absurd personally, but that is the way that so many voters think. And there's just a lot of really good metrics that support Rudy Gobert being the best regular season defender. And even though defensive metrics in particular are very flawed, a lot of people kind of key in on that sort of thing. I think the second piece of it is people are just enamored with the fact that Gobert is like super engaged defensively all the time, which is completely ridiculous when you factor in the responsibilities that Anthony Davis has, that Bam Adebayo has, that Victor Wembanyama has. AD and Bam were both like fulcrum ball screeners in a 5-out offense all year. Like they were guys that had to like consistently make decisions and set screens and roll hard to the rim, not in a way where like Rudy Gobert, where it's like maybe you'll catch and finish every once in a while. They were expected to score. They were expected to score consistently on the offensive end of the floor. And Victor Wembanyama, obviously, as well, is a guy that is a primary initiator for his team. And so, like, and I can speak to this from personal experience. Like when I was in college, when I was in junior college, I was like one of the best scorers on my team. I was the guy that had the ball in my hands a ton. Then I went to NAIA, and when I was there, I played alongside 2 All-American guards. My role fundamentally changed from guy who had the ball in his hands to I stayed on the floor and like kept my spot in the lineup by basically devoting all of my energy towards guarding the other team's best player and trying to knock corner threes down, right? So like in that every game I went in, like all I cared about was defense, because that was how I kept my job while I was playing alongside really good offensive players. And so that's what Rudy Gobert does. Rudy Gobert goes into tonight's game. He's not thinking about anything on the offensive end. The only thing Rudy Gobert's thinking about tonight going into the game is, how do I anchor this defense? Whereas Anthony Davis, when he's going into game 5 in Denver, he's thinking, man, I got to give him an efficient 30 tonight too. You know what I mean? And so like there's just a lot of pressure on those guys to do more. And I genuinely think all 3 of those guys, and arguably Draymond as well, are better defensive players in a vacuum than Rudy Gobert. But because Rudy Gobert devotes all of his energy in that direction, he puts up these crazy metrics, and all the voters just kind of glom onto that sort of thing, and they run with it every single year. And so Rudy Gobert has 4 Defensive Player of the Year trophies, and I think he's probably somewhere around the 5th to 7th best defensive player in the world. And it is what it is. We're this close to crowning a new NBA champ, and with the action heating up on the court, it's even hotter at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. There's only so many games left, and DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered with same-game parlays, live betting, odds boosts, and so much more. Don't miss out, or you'll have to wait until next NBA season to place your bets. It's super easy for first-timers to get started. Try betting on something simple, like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your squad, and place your first bet. It's that simple. The championship odds right now, as we head into the conference finals, according to DraftKings, Boston's at -150, the Timberwolves at +275, the Mavericks at +500, and the Indiana Pacers, a long shot, at +2,500. New to DraftKings, listen up. New customers can get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500. Just deposit at least $5, and you'll get a bonus bet back equal to your first bet if it doesn't hit. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500 if your first bet doesn't hit. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. If the Timberwolves, mostly Towns and Ant, were playing like they were the first 2 rounds, would they be up 3-0 or at least 2-1? I mean, yeah, but think about why they're playing poorly. They're not playing poor. Like so many people want to, point to this as like some sort of mental shortcoming. Like, oh, Karl Towns and Anthony Edwards just ran into this aura of Luka Doncic and then they just crumbled to pieces. No, like they're playing a very different defense than they did in the first 2 rounds. They are completely incapable of getting into the paint. All of Minnesota's paint finishes have come off the ball, either through cleanups around the rim, putbacks, or attacking closeouts on the weak side. Karl Towns and Anthony Edwards are not consistently getting into the lane because of elite perimeter athleticism and elite vertical athleticism under the rim for Dallas. And so again, like, they're not playing well, but there's a basketball reason for that. Like, we got to get out of this whole like, oh, they crumbled under the pressure. No. Like, there's, generally speaking, if the basketball conditions are favorable, a player is going to play well. And if basketball conditions are not favorable, they're not going to play well. And again, it's exposed a couple of weaknesses as we've gone over in this series. I've consistently said Karl Anthony Towns is a guy that if you can flatten out his drives and shut off the lane from him, he's an inconsistent over-the-top shooter. And so you will turn him into a make-or-miss guy, and he's been missing in this series. That's something that can happen with Karl Anthony Towns. Anthony Edwards, his flaw is he's all one speed right now. And so he's got to learn against these super packed in defenses how to be more methodical to manipulate help defenders, which is going to take him a few more years of experience. There's two of these. I'm so relieved that Jayson is leaning Boston. Would have crushed my soul for him to give us his curse. The second one. Please don't pick the Mavs to win, Jayson. Don't do it. First of all, I literally picked the Mavs to win against the Clippers. I picked the Mavs to win against the Thunder when they were an underdog. So was I cursing the Mavs then? In my pre-playoffs contender rankings, I had Denver 1, Boston 2, Dallas 3. So like I obviously was a huge believer in Dallas all along. I picked against them in this specific series in a razor-thin margin, and then I also laid out in the series preview all the different reasons that Dallas could win, including Jaden McDaniels might be too skinny for Luka, including Dallas has real rim protection that might cause problems for Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns in the lane. I also mentioned, like, I thought Luka's knee might be in rough shape and it might cause some problems. It clearly has not been an issue. So, like, first of all, I haven't cursed your team. Second of all, I've been consistently on the Dallas bandwagon for the most part over the course of the latter portion of the year. So I really don't know where all that sentiment comes from. Why don't teams target Luka? Why didn't they put him in pick and roll? So, first of all, there's a reason why the Wolves can't. Because Luka has been targeted on occasion in this series, and he's ended up on an island against, Luka, or against Anthony Edwards or against Karl Anthony Towns. The reason why the Wolves are struggling with it is, think about it like this. If Ant has Derrick Jones Jr. on him, and he brings Luka into the screen, gets a switch. At that point, where's Gobert? If it's an ISO. If it's an ISO, Gobert's sitting underneath the basket in the dunker spot, right? And who's guarding him? Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford, right? So Luka's defensive job becomes very simple. Just press up on Ant and make him drive. And if he drives, he's just going to drive into all of this damn traffic underneath the rim. Dallas has also been helping heavily off of Jaden McDaniels all series. So, like, it's not that they're not trying to target Luka. It's just it doesn't solve the fundamental problem, which is Ant can get by his man. That's not the issue. Even Derrick Jones Jr., Ant can get by him. It's the totality of the team defense and the way they're packing the paint, and with Gobert and McDaniels being left open, how they're incapable of consistently making them pay for doing that. But Boston is very, very big on matchup attacking. Up until the point where Tyrese Haliburton left the series, the vast majority of action they were running was targeting Tyrese Haliburton, either on the ball through pick and roll or off the ball through inverted pick and roll where he was hedging and recovering. Boston was going at him every single time down the floor. Boston can get centers out of the paint because they have shooting bigs, so they can like legitimately play 5 out all the time, right? And so from that perspective, I do think Luka will get targeted a lot more consistently in the Boston series, and it will come down to, is Dallas willing to hedge and recover, or are they just going to have to double team him out of those situations, or is Luka just going to slide his feet and do it well? We're going to find out in that next round. Every Luka play description has you saying, watch how Luka bumps Jaden to create separation, or watch how Luka hits him so hard he goes flying, or Luka gives him a little off-arm creating separation, or watch Luka bump Jaden with a drop step here, with each being followed by a Luka step back. This action is never called an offensive foul. How can anyone guard this type of play effectively? Basketball's a contact sport. I hate to break it to you. That's just what it is. It's not like every single... basketball, not only is basketball a contact sport, it becomes more and more of a contact sport the later you get into the playoffs. And that's just not even just a NBA thing. That's at every level. Whether it's high school, when you get into the playoffs, it gets more physical. Whether it's an NCAA tournament game, it gets like that. Whether it's a money tournament where there's money on the line and guys are playing. Like, it just, anytime the intensity and stakes rise, it becomes a contact sport. And so that's why, if you look back through NBA history, it's usually the big, strong guys who end up playing the best. It ends up being the Lukas, it ends up being the Jokic's, it ends up being the LeBron Jameses, it ends up being the Giannis's in this league, right? The big, strong guys who have the most success. Why are you so convinced that Ant will just learn to be a smart player and game controller? He will improve, of course, but he has an enormous gap to close with guys like Luka or Jokic. I'm sure he will be a brilliant player for years to come, but I do not really see the signs of him being a great decision maker consistently. I have the impression that Wemby is more likely to have that type of impact, and he is in his way also a freak of nature like Ant. So if anyone is going to be an outstanding force in the league other than Luka or Jokic, it's going to be Wemby, not Ant. Here's the thing. Wemby's a very different type of player than Ant, but he also has that type of potential. I absolutely think that Wemby could be better than Ant. He should be better than Ant, right? Like, he's got the best set of physical tools ever in the history of NBA prospects, right? So, like, Wemby's kind of like a different thing. As far as Ant goes, he's 22 years old, guys. He's 22 years old. Michael Jordan and LeBron James didn't win their first titles until they were 27. That's 5 years. 5 more playoff runs. Like, think about how long ago 5 years was. 5 years ago, Kawhi Leonard was playing for the Toronto Raptors. 5 years ago, Kevin Durant was still wearing a Golden State Warriors jersey. Okay? Like, that's how far we have to get for Ant to be able to win a title on the same schedule as the LeBron James, Michael Jordan tier of guys at the top of the league in NBA history, right? So, like, I wouldn't overthink that. And most importantly, I've seen encouraging signs. Ant having that disastrous first half in Game 7 and then figuring out how to be deeply impactful in the second half, that was a huge sign of adaptability from Ant. Even in this series, I know every Mavericks fan is just convinced it was because of Lively. I thoroughly disagree. In terms of his overall approach, he was much smarter in the second half of Game 3. No, it's not going to be enough to turn the series around, but he is adaptable, he is learning, and he is rapidly improving. Give this dude 5 more off seasons, 5 more 82-game grinds, 5 more playoff runs. He's going to be so damn good, guys. He's going to be so damn good. It looked like he might be ahead of schedule. Turns out, still needs some more time, but that doesn't mean we need to pretend the dude is incapable of reaching where he wants to get to. Need the Boston versus Mavs breakdown. Like I said, obviously we're going to wait until after the Mavs series ends, but we will do many layers of series preview content for this matchup. A ton of film. Probably going to have some guests on as well. We're going to have lots to get into over the course of the coming week. How has Ant's potential changed 0 after the series? You just said in this video that he will need considerably more time to reach the peak. So that's considerably less rings for him. He potentially could have started winning championships starting this season, but now it'll take him a couple more years to get his first. The potential does change. No, it doesn't. LeBron James and Michael Jordan didn't win their first until 27, and they've combined to win 10. He was on pace to be way ahead of schedule. It looks like he's got a ways to go. But guys, he's 22. He barely can order a beer, okay? Jason, I love the channel and have improved my understanding of basketball immeasurably thanks to your logical and insightful breakdowns of the game. I use the logic you taught me to predict that the Mavs have many advantages in this matchup, and that should put them as considerable favorite, despite what the overall narratives were surrounding the series. Looking back on your coverage, I believe you have the basketball IQ and experience to have gone against the majority of your peers and predicted the shape of this matchup before Game 1. But you allowed yourself to be moved by more narrative-based statements, such as Edwards is playing like a top 5 player in the league, or that either Denver or Minnie could easily beat Dallas or Oklahoma City. Do you think this is a fair assessment, and that if you followed your own processes more strictly, you could have predicted this series more accurately? So, first of all, I really do try to look at the basketball before going into the series. If you guys go back and listen to the series preview, and you'll hear a lot of the same shit that's happened in the series. I specifically brought up McDaniels might not be able to guard Luka. I specifically brought up that the rim protection might be an issue for Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns. I specifically brought up that Derrick Jones Jr. was a freaky athlete that might be able to have some more success keeping Anthony Edwards in front off of the dribble. I looked at all those advantages. I think where I specifically made a mistake was I knew Dallas's rim protection would be different than Denver. I just thought Ant would have more success against it. So, honestly, This series should be a little closer than it is. It shouldn't be a sweep. Dallas isn't 4-0 better than Minnesota, but Anthony Edwards is having a really, really rough series, which can happen sometimes for young basketball players when they run into a tough matchup. And so, again, like the way I look at it, like I was wrong, but I had it close. Go look at in the preview. I've specifically said like this can go either way. Dallas certainly can win. I'm picking Minnesota. I thought Minnesota's defense would have a little bit more impact on Luka, and I thought Anthony Edwards would have a little bit more success attacking in the half court against this team. It went a different way. I was wrong. It happens. I don't know what else to say. But at the end of the day, guys, guys, Minnesota beat Denver. Minnesota beat Denver, and Anthony Edwards went toe-to-toe with the best player in the world and like played more or less at his level over the course of a 7-game series. Like Dallas flipped the script. Good on them. Tip the cap. But like, let's not sit here and pretend like Minnesota was a bunch of bums and we all foolishly picked bums over because of narratives over the Dallas Mavericks. That's not the way that I see it. First you were on Denver, then Minnesota, now Dallas. Do you have pick integrity? Couple things. I hate this part of the job, but it's something that we have to do, right? There is no such thing as like a basketball analyst out there. If there is one, show me. Who year in, year out just picks every single series correctly. It's not a thing. I remember when I was talking with Ethan Strauss on his podcast, he said something that I thought was fascinating. He goes, humans on a deep level are addicted to variance. And what he meant by that was like, we want to go into a situation and not know what's going to happen. Right. And he was referring to it with JJ Redick wanting to get back into coaching. And essentially the way I interpreted that and what I thought was super fascinating is like, that's what makes sports fun to watch, guys, is we don't know what's going to happen. If we knew every single game clearly who was going to win, no one would watch. Where's the fun in that? Like at the end of the day, like that's what we love about sports is you tune in for Game 7, Denver, Minnesota, and it's like, man, what's going to happen tonight? Is Denver going to flex their championship muscles and get this thing done? Or is Minnesota on the strengths of this 22-year-old kid and a great defense going to beat these guys? And you're like, grab your popcorn, man, pop an ice cold beer. Let's watch what happens. Like that's what we love about sports. And then guess what? We turn it on and it's like, holy shit, Denver's up 20. Oh my gosh, they haven't scored in like 5 minutes. Now Minnesota's back in the game. Uh-oh. Naz Reid's making shots. It's, oh my gosh, Minnesota's going to win. That's why we love sports. That's why we love it. I said this on a mailbag like a week ago. There's nothing that has surprised me more since getting into this industry than how obsessed people are with like my ability to successfully predict playoff series, which is like completely absurd. It's completely absurd. Secondly, I was on Denver because they have the best player in the world and they have a damn good basketball team. They barely lost in a series where they led by 20 in the fourth quarter. Dallas was third on my list of championship contenders this year. I picked them over Minnesota to start the playoff run, right? Obviously, I became very optimistic on Minnesota after they beat Denver. Also, I picked Dallas to win in the first round. I picked Dallas to win in the second round. There's no such thing as picking. Honestly, whoever wrote that question, I want another mailbag answer. What do you mean by pick integrity? What does that damn mean? I just don't understand. Like, help me understand what you're expecting in terms of picks. It's so confounding to me. In retrospect, do you think that the fact that Minnesota took all 7 games to beat Denver was an indication that they were not ready? They went up 2-0, and honestly, I think it should have ended in 5 or 6 max. The matchup was literally perfect for Minnesota. I'm curious to see what you think about this. I don't think it needs to be overthought. I thought, honestly, just Denver is a championship caliber team that flexed their muscles and was able to kind of regain control of the situation. But at the very last minute, Minnesota kind of dug their heels in and they were able to kind of drag it back. But again, guys, like they were up 20 in the second half of Game 7. Some of this is just the weirdness of sports, right? Would you consider doing off-season film breakdowns of some of the all-time great players, specifically their moves that changed the game, a la the Iverson cut? Love the channel. You've helped me on my journey to love the game of basketball again with your great analysis. Thank you. First of all, I bitch and moan a lot about the people in my comments that are complaining constantly. But the overwhelming majority of you guys are positive, and I want to make sure that I let you guys know that I'm aware of that, and I'm super thankful for it, and I appreciate all of your guys' support and the kind words along the way. As far as the offseason, this is our first offseason having film, and I'm really excited to see what we do. When we do player rankings, gonna include film. When we do all-time rankings, gonna include film. When we do season previews, we're gonna include film. So like draft stuff, we're gonna be able to do film this year. So like I'm excited to see what we do. We'll probably after the finals do some sort of like strategy meeting internally to kind of come up with some ideas, but we're gonna do a lot of stuff with film this summer. Jason, mailbag question for you. What do you think is the hardest part regarding prepping for these reaction videos you make? Or even going into a series where it's so evenly matched between both sides? Huge fan of the show. So reaction videos, easily the hardest part is the close game. So you can imagine I'm writing notes, watching the game, I'm writing down all the interesting tactical stuff that I'm seeing, right? But let's say it's 100 to 100 with 4 minutes left. Everything about the narrative of the show and the flow of the show hinges on who wins the game. And often I feel like a certain team's going to win, or I write a bunch of notes about one specific side, and then you have a massive comeback, like a 20-point comeback in the second half of Game 7, and suddenly the entire show flips over. And so instant reaction shows are a kind of interesting and unique challenge in the sense that like it's just you never know what you're going to have to say because things can change so quickly over a few minutes at the end. As far as like series previews, like the hardest part is like I go through the film and I see, oh, this team has this advantage, this team has that advantage, this team has this advantage, this team has that advantage. And it's really difficult to predict something that's wildly unpredictable. The vast majority of the series in this playoff run were between relatively evenly matched teams that could have gone either way. Even just look at Thunder Mavs. If PJ Washington, let's say that Shea gets a clean block on PJ Washington on that corner three and they win and they go home and they win Game 7, the entire NBA Finals could be different. Like we would have Thunder Minnesota in the second round, in the third round. So like, again, all of this stuff hangs by a thread and so many things could have gone differently. And so like, that's the hard part. And like, honestly, when it comes to doing series previews, like half the battle is like, no matter what I pick, I'm going to end up getting slandered for it at the end of the day anyway. Do you think Luka has hit his ceiling as an overall player, or does he have areas to improve? I think obviously with Luka, it's mostly going to be about physical fitness. I think he's obviously a good athlete. I'm not trying to sit here and pretend like he doesn't take care of his body at all, but there certainly is another level he can get to on that front. And I wonder if he will ever get to that in his career, because if he does, that could unlock an entirely different level in terms of him, both defensively and in terms of his conditioning level over the course of games, which is already really good. How do you see the matchup between the Nuggets and the Mavs? Barkley had a short comment that Denver would have beaten Dallas if they had managed to go through Minnesota. I probably would have picked Denver to beat Dallas had they met in the conference finals. It's really this simple. Denver, in the same way that Denver has the personnel to guard Anthony Edwards, they really don't have the personnel to deal with Jokic. They would have to double and swarm him the entire series, which would have led to a ton of open looks. The other part of it, too, is Denver is more capable of handling Dallas's loaded up defense with their ability to move the ball side to side. They play more 5 out, and I think they would have just generated a lot more quality looks. Also, Denver has a player that's big and strong enough to kind of sort of hang with Luka and Aaron Gordon, which is something that Minnesota does not. And that's just fundamentally different. Like Luka wouldn't be able to put Aaron Gordon in jail on those ball screens and manipulate Aaron Gordon the way he does Jaden McDaniels. That said, Dallas certainly could have beat Denver. I would have probably picked Denver on like a 60-40 basis, which means I would have given Dallas like a 40% chance to win the series, which means I certainly think it could have gone that route. I just would feel like it would be more likely that Denver would have won. This was an interesting comment, not really a question, but a comment that I got. Luka versus Jokic is interesting. Obviously, Jokic has certain advantages with his size, but I believe Luka also has a few advantages by virtue of him being a perimeter player and a great ball handler. For example, the best closers usually tend to be guards, and Luka is probably the best closer in the league today. On the Nuggets, too, Murray is typically the one closing games more often than not. Also, because he is a perimeter player, I believe he is able to control the pace of the game more so than Jokic. Having said all that, if there was one shot to be taken, I'd run Jokic post up over any other play in the league. There's just a feeling of inevitability with Jokic that isn't there with anyone else. When it's all said and done, I do expect Luka to end up higher in all-time rankings simply because he's younger by 4 to 5 years. Also, to be fair to him, he's been a superstar basically from day one of his NBA career. That part at the end, I agree with. Like, Luka probably has a better chance of ending up higher all-time just simply because he got started younger, right? I disagree in the sense that I do think Jokic can strangle the pace of the game. I do think Jokic can operate as a closer. He chooses to go through Jamal Murray often just because of matchups, and it's also just Jokic is one of those guys too that like he doesn't give a fuck who makes or takes the shot. He just wants to win. But Jokic is certainly capable of operating as a closer. I actually think Jokic and Luka are very similar. They are two offensive engines who consistently generate quality shots through their team, either by scoring on an island, and they're pretty much unguardable. There's only a handful of guys in the league that can guard both guys. And then the consistent making of good reads when they draw double teams, right? I think if there's one thing that Luka has kind of gained ground on Jokic on as of late is the jump shot. Just Jokic didn't shoot the ball well this year. Luka's shooting it much better. And that ended up being a problem, especially in the Minnesota series when Jokic couldn't hit pick and pop threes. But I think that they're both remarkably similar. The only real difference is they play different positions, and Jokic operates more in the flow of the game as a 5-out guy versus Luka being like a 4-out, heliocentric type of guy. As someone in what I would consider to be the new age of sports media, what is it going to take to get away from the clickbait headlines that currently dominate old/traditional media? I understand that the Celtics have had a far easier road than the Wolves, but the Ant and Tatum narratives are so bizarre to me. So again, guys, this is I don't like watching shows that have overly, critical, clickbaity type of subject matter, right? But I don't have to watch them. Like, this is the beautiful thing about the new age of sports media. Whatever it is you're into listening to, you can find. And so, like, my thing is, like, those things will continue to exist as long as people watch them, and people still do. Like, I still to this day see, ESPN clips with relatively clickbaity topics that perform extremely well. And so, like, people still like that kind of content. It's like, if you're not into that, go listen to something different. You know what I mean? One other thing that I wanted to hit here, I get criticized a lot for, like, my thumbnails and my titles. I don't write the thumbnails or the titles, guys. Just to make that clear. I record the show and I submit it, and then my team does the rest. And so, like, again, like, it's there's a certain business element that we have to be realistic of. Like, if a clickbaity headline gets you guys to click, but then you like my show for being what my show is, then I'm going to take that as a win, even if there was a little grifty thing we had to do off the top to get you to come through the door, right? But, like, once we get the door swing, it's really about whether or not you like the show, right? But again, like, if you guys don't like the stuff that's out there, all you have to do is not watch it, Like, I don't think it's really that complicated. Damn, after hearing all those stats, how does Minnesota even keep it close? Turnovers? I know games 1 and 2, Dallas shot poor from 3, but still. In game 4, should Dallas not push it, protect the ball, and just run half-court sets every possession since they're so much better at it? The main thing that's kept it close is second chance points. The Timberwolves have been much better at converting offensive rebounds into points. They're up 39-25 in second chance points in the series. That has closed the gap on some of the half-court execution stuff. I'm having an argument with my friends, and I said Tatum has to be the one to guard Luka in the finals. Do you agree? Yes, I think that's where the series is eventually going. So if Luka's picking on matchups and just barbecuing all of your smaller perimeter defenders, the only thing you can do is put Tatum on him. Now, how does that work in different coverages? So what that would mean is in ball screens, you have Tatum on Luka and you chase over the top. And that way, when Luka tries to put Tatum in jail, Tatum's big and strong and long enough to actually bother Luka there in a way that a guy like Jaden McDaniels can't, right? From there, Luka will probably start trying to run guard screens to try to get Tatum switched off of him. From there, you run hedge and recover and you rotate. But I think that would be the goal, because that's the best way to get the ball out of Luka's hands and actually make other people try to score, is like if you have it so that he can't attack in straight ISO, because one of the things that Dallas would do is if they're blitzing ball screens against Minnesota, Luka will just attack Jaden McDaniels one-on-one because he feels comfortable. He won't be able to do that as easily with Tatum. So I think Tatum on Luka is probably their best strategy in the long run. Also, Boston has enough offensive talent that if you went to Tatum and said, hey, I need you to devote 80% of your energy to guarding Luka Doncic, Boston would be fine because they have enough offensive talent on the other end to make up for it. All right, we have 4 more, it looks like. Hey, Jason, in your opinion, what has made the Luka-Kyrie backcourt work so well compared to other teams that have tried using 2-star guards like Atlanta and Cleveland? It's really this simple. Atlanta it was Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. Cleveland was Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. Dallas has Luka Doncic, who might be the best player in the world, and Kyrie Irving, who's better as a number 2 than Garland or DeJounte Murray. I don't think we need to overthink it. The stars are actually just really, really good, and they've got really good role players doing all the dirty work for them. Didn't you say that Ant-Man is clearly better than Tatum? So I had a mailbag question that said, where someone said, who would you take right now, Tatum or Ant? And I said, I would take Ant right now, no questions. And here's the thing. When I that was just a quick response to a mailbag question. The way I really feel about it is that I do think that Ant-Man is going to be better than Tatum sooner than later. If I was a GM, I'd rather have Ant-Man on my team than Jayson Tatum. But right now for a playoff series, I think Tatum is better. And I said that in our player rankings when we did the top 5 like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. I had Jokic 1, Luka 2. Did we remove Jokic? No, yeah. It was Jokic 1, Luka 2. I had Tatum 3, Anthony Edwards 4. So that's how I feel. But I do think that I would be stunned if 18 months from now, if Ant wasn't at Tatum's level, and if 36 months from now he wasn't just clearly better. 2 more. I used to enjoy your pod with Raj, and then one day it seemed like it was discontinued. Can you elaborate on what happened there exactly? I know you explained some of the overall journey recently, but I really liked State of the Lakers. So it's really this simple. State of the Lakers was only half the podcast. It started as the Jason Timpf podcast, then it became State of the Lakers, but half of the show was me doing instant reaction shows with Raj at night. The other half of the show was me by myself covering the rest of the league. Raj and I had very different goals. My goal was to cover the NBA at large. Raj's goal is to be a credentialed reporter that covers the Los Angeles Lakers. When the volume reached out to me, they wanted me to cover the league as a solo guy like I was already doing for the other half of the State of the Lakers pod. So that's really all it was. They were essentially just trying to build a new show around what the Jason Timpf podcast was before I started working with Raj. But Raj and I had different goals. Raj doesn't want to cover the entire league and wants to cover the Lakers, and that's what he's doing right now. But I loved working with Raj, and I think he's one of the best people that covers the Lakers, does great work. I think he's doing a show right now with Vinay Kilawala, and they do a great job. Seems like Luka jumped Giannis for you in the best player in the world rankings. How and why? Very simple. I think the most important skill that a basketball player can have is the ability to consistently generate quality shots for his team in the half court. And I think Luka's awesome at it, potentially the best player in the world at it. And for Giannis, I think that's actually been one of the major issues that has plagued him over the years. Like, yes, he got hurt, but when push came to shove against Miami last year, he couldn't get a shot, he couldn't make a quality shot over the top of Bam. Like, he can't even get like a left shoulder hook, right? Going back to the 2022 season, I actually thought he was really good in that series against Boston, but still there's some limitations in terms of his ability to get shots off over the top when he can't just penetrate into the paint. And then obviously before the 2021 season when they won the title, that was consistently what was his issue in 2019 and 2020. 2021 in particular too, a genuine championship, don't take anything away from it, but it was a weird season, and he played some limited competition along the way. And I do think that was one of the things that allowed Giannis to overcome that specific weakness of his. Second part of the question, the Wolves exposed how bad Jokic is as a rim protector. How has that shaped your view on him relative to Giannis and other great bigs in NBA history? So the thing with Jokic is he demonstrated last year that he could defend the rim well enough against really good competition too, against LeBron and AD, against Bam and Jimmy, against KD and Devin Booker. He demonstrated that he could do that last year. I think in a lot of ways, Minnesota drove him into the ground with their overwhelming physicality, and I think he got tired, and I think he fell apart there. So obviously there are some things that he has to improve on in that regard, but I still think, to put it simply, if I had to build a team that could win a championship, I feel like it'd be easier to build one around Jokic than Giannis, simply because it's going to be easy for me to get defensive personnel that can thrive offensively off of what Jokic does than vice versa. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. As always, I sincerely appreciate you guys for supporting the show. We're going to be back tonight live on YouTube after the final buzzer, Game 4 between the Wolves and the Mavs. I will see you guys then.